The wind found no purchase in the canyons of Wyoming. It found its home on the high plains, a vast, white ocean of oblivion. Here, the snow did not just fall. It arrived with malice. It traveled sideways, a billion tiny knives scouring the land, erasing the sky, the horizon, and any path a person might try to follow. In the center of this frozen emptiness stood a cabin. It was not a home, it was a refusal. A small, dark fist of hewn logs raised against the endless white. Smoke, thin and gray, tore itself from the chimney, dissolving instantly into the gale. This was the world belonging to Sarah Blackwood. It was a world reduced to 4 log walls, a roof weighted with sod, and the howl of the wind. Inside, the world was small and warm. It smelled of wood smoke, dried herbs, and the thick, simmering stew that bubbled over the hearth. Sarah Blackwood sat on a low stool, her back to the feeble light of the single window. The window itself was a sheet of ice, opaque and glowing. She was mending a pair of trousers, small trousers, made from the coarse wool of her own late husband's coat. Her needle moved with a steady, rhythmic grace. Every stitch was a tiny act of defiance against the cold, against the loneliness, against the memory of all she had lost. Her husband, Elias, was gone 3 years, taken by the winter, by a fever that burned him out even as the world froze around them. Her daughter, little Mary, followed him a month later. The 2 small graves lay on the leeward side of the hill, buried now under 10 feet of snow. Sarah did not visit them in winter. She did not need to. They were with her, always. The silence in the cabin was a constant echo of their absence. But the cabin was not silent. A boy sat on the floor near the fire, carving a piece of pine. Thomas. He was 6 years old, small for his age, but with a wiry strength. His hair was the color of dark honey, and his eyes were a serious, watchful blue. He was entirely focused on his task, his tongue pressed against his upper lip. He was carving a horse. It looked more like a dog, or perhaps a misshapen coyote, but he was proud of it. Sarah watched him, her hands paused in their mending. This small boy was the only thing that stood between her and the howling void, both outside the cabin and inside her heart. He was not hers, not by blood. He was a gift, a miracle delivered by tragedy. She remembered the day she found him. It was 2 years past. In the thaw of a late spring, she had ridden toward the smoke, a terrible pillar of blackness rising miles to the south. She had found the ruins of a wagon train, the aftermath of a violent raid. The scene was one of utter desolation. Charred wood, scattered belongings, and a silence that screamed. She had found him huddled under an overturned provision wagon, a toddler then, barely 3 years old, covered in soot, silent with shock. He clutched a small, tin soldier. He had not cried, not then. She had scooped him up, her heart a cold stone in her chest, and had ridden away from that place of death. She brought him back to her empty cabin, a cabin that had felt too large, too quiet, ever since Elias and Mary were gone. With Thomas, the cabin came alive again. She had nursed him through the fevers that followed, had taught him to speak again, for he had lost his words in the trauma. He called her mama. She called him son. In the eyes of God, in the uncaring wilderness, it was true. He was her child, the child she had saved, the child who had, in turn, saved her. Their life was a rhythm of survival. They tended their small flock of sheep in the summer, huddled in the lean-to against the cabin now. They fished the creek until it froze. They grew vegetables in a small, rocky patch of garden, canning and drying every last scrap. Sarah was a good shot with the rifle Elias had left her. A rabbit, a grouse, even a deer if she was fortunate. They survived. But love was different from survival. Their bond was woven from shared warmth and simple joys. In the evenings, she would read to him from the one book she owned, a worn Bible. Or she would tell him stories, stories of her own childhood back in Missouri, stories of his future. He would listen. his wide blue eyes fixed on her face, his small hand often finding hers. This connection was the single, most profound truth in her life. He was her purpose. Sarah finished her stitch and tied the thread. She looked at the diminishing pile of firewood stacked against the wall. She looked at the flour sack, now less than a quarter full. A familiar tightness gripped her chest. It was fear, not for herself. She had faced her own end many times. It was fear for him. She felt so utterly alone, so helpless against the sheer size of the land and the brutality of the season. The town of Redemption was 2 days' ride in good weather. In this blizzard, it might as well be on the moon. They were cut off, an island in a sea of white. If Thomas became ill, if the food ran out, if the roof gave way, there would be no help. She pushed the thought away. It was a dark bird that circled her head, and she would not let it land. She would protect him. She had saved him from violence. She would save him from the cold. She would feed him with her own hands, keep him warm with her own body if she must. She was a mother. That was a fact the wilderness could not change. Thomas looked up from his carving. He held out the misshapen piece of wood. He smiled, a gap-toothed, radiant expression that lit the dim cabin. "Look, Mama, a horse, for you." Sarah took it. Her rough fingers traced the clumsy lines. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "It is perfect, Thomas, absolutely perfect." She set the carving on the mantel, a tiny, brave statue against the gloom. Far from the high plains, in a different world, another soul was moving toward them. Ezra Morgan sat in the plush velvet seat of a private rail car. The car rocked gently, the rhythmic clack of the wheels a counterpoint to the turmoil in his heart. He was a man made of straight lines and hard angles. His suit was dark, expensive, tailored in San Francisco. His boots were polished. His face was weathered, not by the son of a cowboy, but by the indoor shadows of finance, of boardrooms, of heavy decisions. He was a millionaire. His ranches spread across 2 territories. His cattle numbered in the new thousands. He owned shares in banks, in shipping lines, in the very railroad that carried him east. He had built an empire from the dust, a testament to a will that could bend the world to his liking. But Ezra Morgan was a hollow man. He looked out the window, but he did not see the passing blur of snow-covered fields. He saw smoke. He saw fire. He saw the face of his wife, Amelia. He saw the small, laughing face of his son, his boy, also named Thomas. It had been 3 years, 3 years since the day his world had ended. They were traveling to join him at the main ranch, their wagon train loaded with furniture from the east, with toys for the boy, with a new piano for Amelia. He had ridden ahead to prepare for their arrival. He had been delayed. He had been too late. When he arrived, he found what Sarah Blackwood had found, a smoking ruin, a scene of unspeakable loss. They told him there were no survivors. They showed him where his wife was buried. His son, they said, was gone, taken, or worse. They never found a trace. For 3 years, Ezra had lived in a state of suspended grief. He had poured his energy into his work, building his fortune with a cold, relentless fury. He built it for no one. It was just a thing to do, a way to pass the days until they ended. He had just returned from San Francisco. He had spent 6 months in the city, attending operas he did not hear, eating in restaurants where the food had no taste. He had sought distraction, some way to numb the raw, exposed nerve of his loss. He found nothing. The fog of the city could not hide the emptiness. So he was returning back to Wyoming, back to the land that held the graves of his family. He was not searching for his son, not anymore. He had accepted the boy was gone. He was searching for an end. He did not know what that end looked like, but he knew he would find it only in the place where his life had fractured. The train slowed, its whistle a mournful cry in the frozen air. They were pulling into Redemption. It was not a place for a man like Ezra Morgan. It was a small, raw town, barely clinging to the edge of the wilderness. It had a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, and a few dozen houses, all buried in snow. His private car would wait. He needed to feel the cold. He needed to stand on the ground. He put on his heavy, fur-lined overcoat and stepped from the train onto the windswept platform. The air was so cold it stung his lungs. A clean, sharp pain. It was real. He welcomed it. He walked down the main street, his polished boots sinking into the boardwalk's drifted snow. He was heading for the telegraph office. Business. Always business. He passed the general store. The door opened, spilling a rectangle of yellow light and a burst of raised voices. Two men, trappers by the look of them, stumbled out, arguing about the price of pelts. Ezra paused. He was about to move on when he heard a snippet of their conversation, carried on the frigid air. "She has no right, the widow Blackwood, living up on that ridge all alone. It is not right, her keeping that boy." "What boy?" "The one she found him after the Red Springs massacre. They say, took him in, claims him as her own." "A boy from the Red Springs massacre?" "Aye, about 6 years old now. A strange thing." Ezra Morgan stopped breathing. The Red Springs massacre. That was what they called it. The name of his personal hell. He turned. He strode toward the two men, who quieted as they saw him approach. They recognized wealth and power when they saw it. He was a figure from another world. "What did you say?" His voice was low, rough with disuse. The men shuffled. The bigger one, smelling of whiskey and cured hides, spoke. "Just talk, mister, about the widow Blackwood. Lives up north of here. Got a foundling boy she raised." "A boy from Red Springs. Tell me everything." Ezra did not ask. He commanded, and the men, intimidated, told him. They told him about the widow who had lost her own family. They told him about the child she had rescued from the wagon train ruins. A boy, maybe 3 at the time, dark honey hair, blue eyes. Ezra felt the world tilt. The blood rushed in his ears, louder than the wind. It could not be. It was a phantom, a cruel joke of the wilderness. His son was gone. His Thomas was gone. But what if he was not? What if the stories were wrong? What if, by some impossible miracle, his son had survived, had been found, had been raised by another? A cold fire lit inside him. It was not hope. It was something harder. It was certainty. A certainty that seized his whole being. He had built an empire on less. He had moved mountains on sheer belief. This boy was his. He knew it with an intensity that burned away 3 years of fog and grief. It was his son, his blood, alive. He turned away from the stunned trappers. He walked back down the street, not to the telegraph office, not to his warm rail car. He walked to the livery stable. He needed a horse, a strong one. He had lost his son once. He would not lose him again. The conflict was not yet visible. It had not yet reached the small cabin in the snow. But it had begun. It began in the heart of Ezra Morgan, a heart that had just, after 3 long years, begun to beat again. It beat with a new, cold, and absolute purpose. He would have his son. The blizzard reached its peak 3 nights later. The world was reduced to a scream. The wind attacked the small cabin, rattling the door latch, forcing tiny particles of snow through the chinking in the logs. Inside, Sarah and Thomas were safe. The fire was bright. The stew was hot. Thomas was sitting on the hearth, tracing letters on a piece of slate. Sarah was knitting, her movements calm, her mind focused on the small circle of warmth they had made. A sound, not the wind, made her stop. A heavy, solid thud against the door. Thomas looked up, his eyes wide. "Who is it, Mama?" Sarah put down her knitting. Her heart was a cold hammer. No one could be out in this, no animal, no person. It was impossible. The thud came again, heavier, a man's weight, perhaps falling against the wood. She rose, taking the rifle from its pegs above the door. She motioned for Thomas to move to the corner, away from the entrance. He obeyed. Silent. She lifted the heavy bar on the door and cracked it open. The wind tore it from her grip, slamming it wide against the interior wall. A figure, a man, collapsed into the room, falling to his knees on the plank floor. He was a creature made of snow and ice, a massive, fur-lined coat, a hat pulled low. He was covered, but he radiated an aura of wealth. Sarah raised the rifle. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man pushed himself up. He pulled the snow-caked hat from his head. He was tall, his face hard, his eyes a piercing gray. He seemed to devour the small room with a single glance. He saw the fire. He saw the stew, and then he saw Thomas. The man froze. All the wind and cold of the outside world seemed to enter the room with his gaze. He stared at the boy. It was not a glance. It was a violation. It was a look of such raw, agonizing recognition that Sarah took a step back. He did not speak to Sarah. He spoke to the child, Thomas. The boy, frozen in the corner, just stared. The man took one step forward. His voice was a low growl, thick with disbelief. "Thomas!" Sarah stepped between them, the rifle leveled at his chest. "I do not know your name, mister, but you will not frighten my son." The man, Ezra Morgan, finally looked at her. His gray eyes were on fire. "My son," he repeated, his voice breaking on the word. "He said it is my son." Sarah felt a cold sickness in her stomach. "You are mistaken. This is my boy, Thomas Blackwood." Ezra ignored her. He was looking only at the child. He pointed a gloved finger. "His name is Thomas Morgan, Jr. He was lost 3 years ago, at Red Springs." Sarah felt the floor drop away. The Red Springs massacre. The words echoed the trapper's gossip. She gripped the rifle tighter. "You are wrong. I found him. He was alone." Ezra took another step. He was shaking. Not from cold, but from something deeper. He reached inside his magnificent coat. Sarah tensed, her finger on the trigger. He did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a small, worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a photograph, a tintype. He held it out. It was a picture of a smiling woman, beautiful and elegant, holding a small boy. The boy was younger, perhaps 3 years old, but it was him. It was Thomas, the same dark honey hair, the same serious blue eyes. Sarah stared at the image. The world stopped turning. It was a lie. It had to be. "He had this," Ezra said, his voice thick. He reached into another pocket and brought out a small, battered tin soldier. The paint was mostly gone. It was identical to the one Thomas kept in his small wooden box under his cot, the one she had found him clutching. Sarah began to tremble. "No." "Yes," Ezra said. "He is mine. I have been searching for 3 years. I thought he was dead." He looked past her, at Thomas, and his hard face cracked. A terrible, dry sob escaped him. "Thomas, you are alive." He pushed past Sarah, who was too stunned to stop him. He knelt before the boy. Thomas pressed himself against the wall. "Do not you remember me?" Ezra asked, his voice desperate. "I am your father, Papa." Thomas just shook his head, his eyes filled with terror. He looked at Sarah. "Mama." That word, "Mama," broke Sarah's paralysis. She lunged forward, grabbing Ezra's shoulder, pulling him back. "Get away from him," she cried. "You are frightening him. Whatever you think you see, you are wrong. He is my son. I saved him. I raised him." Ezra stood. He was a full head taller than her. He looked down, his face hardening again, the brief vulnerability gone, replaced by an iron will. "You saved him," he said, his voice flat, "and you will be rewarded for it. I will pay you anything you ask. Name your price." The word struck Sarah harder than a physical blow. Price. She felt the blood drain from her face, replaced by a hot, white rage. "There is no price. He is not cattle. He is not for sale." "I am not buying him," Ezra Morgan said, his voice turning cold as the storm. "I am taking what is mine. He is my blood, my son. You have kept him safe. Now I am here to take him home." "You will do no such thing. He is my child. I am his mother." "You are nothing to him," Ezra said, the words sharp and cruel. "You are a woman who found him. I am his father." The storm raged outside. Inside, a different storm had broken. They stared at each other. Two unmovable forces. Sarah, with the rifle, her body shielding the boy she loved. Ezra, with the power of his wealth, his certainty, and a father's claim. "You cannot turn a man out in this blizzard," Sarah finally said, her voice shaking with fury. "You can stay by the fire. You will not speak to my son. You will not look at him. In the morning, you will leave." Ezra looked at her, a small, cold smile touching his lips. "I will leave," he agreed, "but I will not be leaving alone." The night was the longest of Sarah's life. Ezra Morgan sat in her husband's chair by the fire. He never slept. He stared into the flames, a dark, brooding statue of tailored wool and simmering purpose. Sarah sat on her stool, the rifle across her lap. Thomas slept fitfully in the loft, disturbed by the tension that filled the small cabin like smoke. When the first gray light of dawn broke the storm, Ezra stood. He looked at Sarah. His eyes were tired, but his will was unbroken. "I will make this easy for you," he said, pulling thick wads of cash from his wallet. He threw them on the table. $500, more money than Sarah had seen in her entire life. Enough to buy a new cabin, to live for years. "Take it," he said, "for your trouble." Sarah looked at the money, then at him. Her disgust was so profound it left no room for fear. "Get out of my home." Ezra sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. He gathered the money. "I had hoped to be reasonable. You are making a mistake. You cannot fight me." He put on his hat and coat, his movements economical and precise. He looked one last time at the loft, where Thomas was hiding. Then he opened the door and stepped out into the blinding, newly peaceful world of snow. Sarah barred the door behind him. She collapsed against it, her body finally surrendering to the terror. He knew. He had proof. And he had money. She looked around her small, poor cabin. She had nothing. Nothing but love. She feared it would not be enough. 2 days later, she took Thomas to redemption. The town was buzzing. Ezra Morgan's private rail car sat on the siding like a royal barge, a symbol of obscene wealth. His claim to the widow Blackwood's boy was on everyone's lips. The community, which had once been a quiet support, was now split. At the general store, Martha Gable, the proprietor's wife, pulled Sarah aside, pressing a sack of flour into her hands. "Do not you listen to them." "Sarah," she whispered, her eyes kind, "you raised that boy. He is yours in the eyes of God. That man, for all his money, cannot change that." But outside, the sentiment was different. As she walked down the boardwalk, she passed Mr. Henderson, the banker. He tipped his hat, his eyes cold. "A difficult situation, Mrs. Blackwood. Blood is blood, after all. And Mr. Morgan is a very important man. He is a benefactor to this entire territory. A father has a right to his own son." Sarah felt the stares of the townsfolk. Some were pitying, some were curious, some were hostile, as if she were a thief, standing in the way of a great man's happiness. She was the poor, lone widow. He was the millionaire. She felt the scales of justice tilting, weighted down with gold. She hurried Thomas back to their wagon, her supplies loaded. She wanted to get back to the cabin, to their sanctuary, but the world was no longer safe. They were a mile from her ridge when 2 riders emerged from the trees, Jedediah Stone and his brother, Malachi. They were coarse men, known for trouble. They owned the failing ranch that bordered hers, and they had long coveted her land for its creek. "Well now," Malachi said, spitting tobacco juice onto the snow. "Look here, Jed, it is the little widow." Jedediah Stone, a large, unkempt man, smiled, showing broken teeth. He moved his horse to block Sarah's path. "Heard you were having some trouble. Mrs. Blackwood, heard you might be losing that boy." Sarah pulled her wagon to a halt. Thomas huddled close to her. "Leave us be, Jedediah." "No, that ain't neighborly," he said, his smile fading. "See, we figure you are going to be all alone up here, and that land it is too much for a lone woman. We were thinking, maybe you want to sell." "I am not selling," Sarah said, her hand moving toward the rifle tucked by her seat. Jedediah laughed. "You ain't in a position to bargain, woman. That millionaire ain't gonna let you keep that land. He will take the boy, and you will have nothing. We are offering you a kindness, $50, for the whole plot." "It is worth 10 times that," Sarah said, her voice cold. "The price is 50, Malachi snarled. "Or maybe it is nothing. Maybe we just take it. Who is going to stop us, the sheriff? He is busy shining Mr. Morgan's boots." Jedediah reached out and grabbed the bridle of Sarah's horse. The horse shied, and Thomas cried out. "You think about it," Jedediah said. "We will be back tomorrow. You have the deed ready, or else." A third rider appeared on the trail behind them. He was not riding fast. He was riding a magnificent black stallion that walked with an imposing grace. Ezra Morgan. He reined in his horse a few yards away. He looked at the Stone brothers. He did not look at Sarah. "Gentlemen," Ezra said, his voice quiet, yet it cut through the cold air. Jedediah Stone let go of the bridle. He stared at Morgan. "This ain't your concern, Mr. The boy, Thomas, is my concern," Ezra said. "He lives on this land. That makes this land my concern. This property is now under my protection. If I see you here again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. If you threaten Mrs. Blackwood again, I will have you arrested for extortion. Do you understand me?" The Stone brothers were not cowards, but they were not fools. They were looking at a man who could buy the law, the sheriff, and the whole town. Jedediah spat into the snow again. "This ain't over," he muttered. He and Malachi wheeled their horses and disappeared back into the pines. Sarah's hands were shaking. She hated the Stone brothers, but she hated this more. She hated being saved by him. It was not a rescue. It was a transaction. He was protecting his property. The boy— "I did not ask for your help," she said, her voice tight. "You need it," Ezra replied, his face unreadable. "They will be back. You are not safe here." "I am safe in my home." He moved his horse closer. His gray eyes locked on hers. "Your home, this shack, you call this safe. He has no proper clothes. The cabin is drafty. You are isolated. What if he gets sick? What if you are attacked? You cannot protect him." "I have protected him." "You have hidden him," Ezra corrected. "That is over. He is my son. He will have the best of everything. Doctors, tutors, a home in San Francisco. He will not live in squalor." "This is not squalor. This is our home." "It is not," Ezra said. "It is a hovel, and the law will agree with me." He turned his horse. Sarah cried out, desperate. "What do you want from me?" "I want my son." "He is my son, too." The sheriff served the papers the next day, a petition to the territorial court in redemption. A hearing was set for the following week, Judge Harlan presiding. Sarah went to see the judge. She cleaned herself and Thomas, putting on her one good dress, the dark wool she had been married in. Judge Harlan was a weary man with a thin mustache. He listened patiently. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, steepling his fingers, "I understand your attachment. It is commendable. You have done a good thing." But Sarah asked, "But the law is clear on these matters. A father's right is paramount. Mr. Morgan has provided proof of paternity, a photograph, a witness who saw his wife purchase the tin soldier in St. Louis. He has established his claim. And my claim, the claim of a mother. The past 2 years, does that mean nothing?" "It means you are a good woman," the judge said. not unkindly. And Mr. Morgan has stated very clearly that he intends to compensate you for your time. Sarah stood up. The sickness was back in her throat. Compensate. She was not a wet nurse. She was not an employee. She was his mother. She walked out of the judge's office into the cold street. She held Thomas's small hand in hers. The town seemed to look at her with a single, pitying eye. She was trapped. Morgan had money, he had the law, and he had the truth. She had only love. And in the eyes of the world, that was not worth a single dollar. The day before the hearing, the sky turned a dead, bruised yellow. The air grew still, a heavy, breathless silence that was more terrifying than any wind. Sarah, having left Thomas with Martha Gable at the store, was walking to the judge's office. She had no lawyer, no money, no new evidence. She had only her own words, and she was going to speak them one last time, to beg the judge as a mother. She knew it was useless. She was halfway down the main street when the first gust hit. It did not come from the north. It came from all directions at once, a blast of ice and fury that knocked a barrel off the boardwalk. Within minutes, the world was gone, swallowed by a white, roaring chaos. This was not a storm, it was a tantrum of the gods. People scrambled for cover. Sarah fought her way into the general store, the door slamming shut behind her, the small bell jangling wildly. The store was crowded, townsfolk, trappers, and ranchers, all seeking refuge. Thomas ran to her, and she held him tight. The talk was of the storm. Old Man Hemlock, the telegraph operator, burst in, his face gray with more than cold. "The wire is dead," he announced to the room, "and the Cheyenne stage it was due an hour ago. It is out there." A cold silence fell over the crowd. Everyone knew what that meant. The stage route crossed the open prairie, a flat, featureless expanse that offered no shelter. To be caught there in this, it was a death sentence. A commotion at the door. It opened, and Ezra Morgan filled the frame. He was not dressed in his city clothes. He was wearing the practical, heavy gear of a frontier rancher. Sheepskin coat, leather chaps, and a look of absolute command. Behind him were 3 men from his own ranch, similarly geared. "Mr. Hemlock," Ezra said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Where was the last check in?" "Fort Laramie. Yesterday, they would have been at the halfway station." "The one at Bitter Creek," Ezra finished. "I know it. They are likely caught between there and here." He turned to the room. "I need men, and I need the best horses you have. I am paying $100 to any man who rides with me." The sum was staggering, but even so, men hesitated. They looked out the window at the white oblivion. "That ain't pay, Mr. Morgan," one man muttered. "That is funeral money." "I am not asking, I am going," Ezra said. "I will go." The voice was clear and steady. Sarah Blackwood stepped forward, her hand still holding Thomas's. Every eye in the room turned to her. She looked directly at Ezra. "I know that land. I know where the drifts will be. I know the hollows. You do not. You will ride in circles." Ezra stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief, quickly replaced by hot anger. "Do not be ridiculous, woman. This is a search party, not a Sunday social. Go back to your boy." "He is safer here with Martha than he is with you in a courtroom," she shot back, her voice ringing with scorn. "I am not asking for your permission. I am telling you. You want to find those people. You need me." She turned to Martha Gable, who was pale. "Watch him. Martha, please." Martha nodded, her eyes wide with fear and awe. She took Thomas's hand. Ezra grabbed Sarah's arm as she moved toward the door. "I forbid it. You are a liability." She tore her arm from his grasp. Her eyes were blue fire. "You forbid it. You are not my master, Mr. Morgan. You are just a man with a long wallet. And out there," she pointed to the screaming white, "that wallet is just paper. I know how to survive. You only know how to buy." A strange look passed over Ezra's face. It was not anger. It was a flash of raw, grudging respect. He stared at her for a long second. the noise of the store fading. He saw no poor widow. He saw a warrior. "Fine," he bit out the word, "but you ride where I say. You do what I say." He turned to his men. "Give her a horse, one of the strong ones." They rode into hell. The world was a white, roaring void. Snow and ice, driven by a wind so powerful it threatened to lift horse and rider from the ground. Visibility was less than 10 feet. It was impossible to see, impossible to hear anything but the scream of the wind. They rode with their heads down, bandanas pulled over their faces. Ezra led, his men behind, with Sarah in the middle. He was a magnificent horseman, guiding his stallion with a firm, confident hand. But after an hour, even he was lost. He stopped, and the others huddled around him. "We should be near the ridge," he yelled over the storm. "We are too far east," Sarah yelled back, pointing into the white. "The wind is pushing us. The creek bed is that way. We follow it. It is the only road." Morgan looked at her, his face covered in ice, only his furious gray eyes visible. He did not want to yield. "It is their only chance," she screamed. They would have gone for the draw. He held her gaze. Then, with a curt nod, he turned his horse, following her direction. They rode for another hour. A brutal, soul-crushing journey. They were no longer riders. They were just small, dark specks, fighting to exist against an element that wanted them erased. One of his men's horses stumbled, going down in a deep drift. The man fell, and the horse, panicked, scrambled to its feet and bolted, disappearing into the white in an instant. The man was left stranded. "Leave him," Ezra ordered, his voice cold and practical. "He can follow our tracks back. We cannot risk the others." "He is your man," Sarah cried, horrified. "He is paid for the risk," Ezra said. "We keep moving." Sarah pulled her horse to a stop. "She would not." She started to dismount. "I will not leave him." Ezra rode back, his face a mask of fury. "Get on that horse, woman, or I will put you on it." It was her rifle that answered. She pulled it from the scabbard on her saddle and leveled it at his chest. "You are not God. Ezra Morgan. You do not get to decide who lives and who dies." They stared at each other, the blizzard raging around them. It was the hearing, the courtroom, the entire conflict, distilled to this one frozen moment. Him, with his power and his cold, hard logic. Her, with her rifle and her unbending, furious compassion. He should have been angry. He should have taken the rifle from her. Instead, he found himself staring at her, at the raw courage, the sheer, magnificent defiance. She was willing to die here, on this frozen plain, for a man she did not even know. He broke first. He cursed, a low, savage sound. "John," he yelled to his other man, "give him your horse. We will ride double. We are wasting time." They retrieved the fallen man, who was shaking with cold and fear. Ezra pulled him up behind his own saddle. He looked at Sarah. His eyes were unreadable. He did not thank her. He did not apologize. He simply turned his horse and said, "Lead the way, Mrs. Blackwood." She did. She led them into the teeth of the wind, following an instinct, a memory of the land. She found the draw, and in it, half buried in a drift, was the stagecoach. It was on its side. One horse was dead, the others were gone. They dismounted, fighting through the waist-deep snow. Ezra tore the door open. Inside were 3 people, huddled together, barely conscious. A man and a woman, and a child. A little girl, no older than Thomas. They are alive. The next few minutes were a blur of desperate, cold, fumbling action. Ezra and his men pulled the man out. He was the driver. His leg was broken, the bone jutting at an unnatural angle. The woman and child were shivering, their lips blue, but unharmed. Ezra was all business. "We get them on the horses. We wrap them. We go." Sarah went to the woman, who was clutching her child. She was trying to soothe her, but the woman was nearly hysterical with cold and fear. Sarah tore off her own heavy gloves and began rubbing the child's hands and feet, her own fingers instantly numb. Ezra was working on the driver, trying to lift him. The man screamed as his leg was jostled. "We have to splint this," Sarah yelled. "He will not survive the ride." "We have nothing," Ezra yelled back. Sarah looked at the wrecked coach. Her eyes landed on a broken piece of the door frame. She waded through the snow, grabbed it, and snapped 2 pieces over her knee. She ripped a long strip of wool from her own petticoat. She handed it to Ezra. "Hold him." Ezra watched, amazed. As she directed his own men, she was no longer a widow. She was a field general. She set the splint with a firm, practiced hand, her movements economical and sure. She was not a stranger to this. She had set bones before. She had buried her own husband. As she tied the last knot, she looked up, her face raw from the wind, her hair frozen in icy strands. She met his gaze. There was no triumph, only shared purpose. A sudden, violent gust, stronger than the rest, hit the ridge above them. The snowpack, unstable, gave way. It was not an avalanche. It was a slide, a river of heavy, wet snow that poured down into the draw. Ezra saw it first. "Sarah." He lunged, grabbing her waist, pulling her back as the snow swept over the spot where she had been kneeling. The force of his pull and the slickness of the ice underfoot sent them both tumbling. They fell hard into a deep drift against the side of the draw. She landed on her back. He landed on top of her. The world stopped. The roar of the wind seemed to fade. All she could feel was his weight, his solidness. All she could see were his eyes, inches from hers. He was breathing hard. The ice was gone from his face, melted by his own heat. She saw, for the first time, the man, not the millionaire, not the antagonist. She saw the lines of grief etched around his mouth. She saw the panic in his eyes, a naked human terror. He was not looking at her with anger. He was looking at her as if she were a ghost, as if he had almost lost her. "I thought he said," his voice a hoarse whisper. He did not finish. He did not move. His grip on her arms was iron. She should have been terrified. She should have pushed him away, but she was frozen. She was looking at a man who understood loss, a man who, like her, was defined by the people he could not save. His wife, his son. He saw it in her eyes, too, the shared, bottomless pit of grief. He saw the woman who had faced a massacre and pulled a child from the wreckage. He saw the woman who had just faced down a blizzard, his own men and him, all to save a stranger. He saw the woman who was his son's mother, in every way that mattered. The moment stretched. It was a silent, profound confession. He was not just fighting for his son. He was fighting this woman, and he was beginning to realize, to his own horror, that she was the most vital, the most alive, the most terrifyingly admirable person he had ever met. One of his men shouted, "Sir, are you all right?" The spell broke. Ezra rolled off her, his movements stiff. He pulled himself to his feet and then, without a word, reached down and offered her his hand. She looked at it for a second. It was the hand of the man trying to take her son, but it was also the hand of the man who had just saved her life. She took it. His grip was warm. He hauled her to her feet as if she weighed nothing. They did not speak. They did not need to. They turned back to the survivors. The rescue was not over. They got the people loaded onto the horses, the woman and child with one man, the injured driver with another. Ezra, his face now an unreadable mask, helped Sarah onto her own horse. His touch on her waist lingered for just a second. They rode back to town. It was a journey of brutal, shared survival. They arrived hours later, half frozen, but with everyone alive. The town hailed them as heroes. They poured out of the store, taking the survivors, wrapping them in blankets, carrying them to the doctor's office. Sarah slid from her horse, her legs numb, and nearly collapsed. She saw Martha and Thomas watching from the store window. She started toward them. "Mrs. Blackwood." She stopped. She turned. Ezra Morgan was standing by his horse. The town was a flurry of activity around them. but they were in a bubble of silence. "The hearing is at 10 tomorrow," he said. His voice was flat, but his eyes were not. They were full of the storm, of the snowslide, of the moment in the drift. "I know," she said, her own voice barely a whisper. He nodded, as if he had made a decision. Then he turned, without another word, and led his horses toward the livery. Sarah watched him go. She hated him. She hated his money, his arrogance, and his legal claim. But she knew, as she walked into the warm store and pulled her son into her arms, that what she felt was no longer simple. She had seen the man, and the man was as lost and as broken as she was. The courtroom was the judge's office, and it was hot, small, and smelled of old paper and wet wool. The entire town, it seemed, had crammed itself into the small space, lining the walls, spilling out into the hallway. They were there to see the show, The Poor Widow Against the Millionaire. Sarah stood near the front, holding Thomas's hand. He was dressed in his mended, clean clothes. She had braided her hair, a tight, severe coil. She felt exposed, a specimen under glass. Ezra Morgan stood on the other side of the desk. He was not the man from the blizzard. The ice and sheepskin were gone. He was back in his dark, perfectly tailored suit. He looked like a blade. Beside him stood a man Sarah had never seen, a lawyer in an identical suit, his briefcase on the judge's desk. He had arrived on a special train. Judge Harlan banged his gavel. The sound was too loud for the small room. The murmuring stopped. "This is a hearing," the judge began, looking weary. "Not a trial. We are here to determine the rightful and best guardianship for the child known as Thomas." He looked at Ezra's lawyer. "Mr. Davies, you may begin." Mr. Davies stood. He was smooth, and his voice was a calm, reasonable drone. He laid out the facts, the indisputable facts. "We have the photograph, Your Honor. We have the proof of purchase for the tin soldier. We have Mr. Morgan's sworn testimony. There is no doubt that this child is Thomas Morgan, Jr., his biological son." He then spoke of the Red Springs massacre. He painted Ezra as a grieving father, a man who had spent 3 years and a fortune searching for his lost child. And now, by a miracle, he had found him. Then, the attack, Mr. Davies's voice, still calm, dripped with condescension. "Mr. Morgan is a man of significant means. He can offer the boy a life of safety, of privilege, the finest tutors in San Francisco, the best doctors, a secure home." He gestured vaguely in Sarah's direction. "We have only gratitude for Mrs. Blackwood. She has served as a temporary guardian, and Mr. Morgan intends to show that gratitude with a generous compensation." Sarah flinched as if struck. "But," Mr. Davies continued, "a lone woman in an isolated cabin with no means of support. It is, by any standard, an unfit environment. We have reports of local ruffians, the Stone brothers, threatening her. She is unable to provide the most basic security." Sarah's stomach turned. He was twisting the truth, using her vulnerability, the very thing Ezra had supposedly saved her from, as a weapon. Mr. Davies concluded, "Your Honor, the law is clear. A father's right is paramount. Blood is blood. We ask that the child be immediately restored to the custody of his loving and living father." He sat down. The silence in the room was heavy, final. Judge Harlan looked at Sarah. "Mrs. Blackwood, do you have a response?" Sarah's hand was sweating. She was holding onto Thomas's hand so tightly, her knuckles were white. She had no lawyer. She had no proof. She had nothing. She stepped forward. She did not look at the judge. She looked at Ezra Morgan. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling, but clear. I cannot argue with the law. I do not know it, and I cannot argue with his blood. That is his father. I have known that in my heart since the night he came to my cabin." Ezra's expression did not change, but she saw a flicker deep in his gray eyes. The lawyer, Mr. Davies, is right about many things. I am poor. My cabin is small. I am alone. He can give Thomas the world. I can only give him a corner of it. But that lawyer is wrong about one thing. He says I am a temporary guardian. That is a lie. Her voice grew stronger. It filled the small room. I am his mother. She did not say it with anger. She said it as a fact as hard and real as the mountains outside. Blood may be blood. Judge. But blood did not find him in the wreckage of that wagon. Blood did not hold him while he screamed for a month, waking from nightmares. Blood did not break a fever in the dead of winter. Blood did not teach him his letters, or how to carve a piece of wood, or how to laugh again. I did. She let go of Thomas's hand and held her own hands up. They were rough, scarred, the hands of a woman who worked. These hands, these are my proof. She looked back at Ezra. Her gaze was unflinching. He was a man, she knew, a man who had seen her in the blizzard, a man who had pulled her from a snowslide. He had to see. You lost a son, Mr. Morgan. I know what that is. I lost my husband. I lost my daughter. We are the same, in that empty place. But you are trying to fill that place by taking. I filled mine by loving. They are not the same thing. You can offer him a safe home. You can offer him tutors. But you cannot offer him a mother's love. Because I am his mother. And even if you take him, even if this court gives him to you, you cannot take me from him. I am part of him now, as surely as your blood is. You saved my life 2 days ago. She said it out loud. The room gasped. Mr. Davies looked confused. Ezra met her eyes. She saw the storm, the memory. You saved me from the snow. Do not, I am begging you, do not bury me in a different one. Do not take my son. She finished. The room was absolutely, painfully silent. She was weeping. She did not care. She had spoken her truth. Judge Harlan looked down at his desk. He was visibly moved. He cleared his throat. Mrs. Blackwood, your words they are a testament to your character. But the law is not written in feeling. It is written in precedent. A father's right, established and proven, is supreme, unless you can prove Mr. Morgan unfit. Sarah's head snapped up. Unfit. She looked at the man who had ridden into a blizzard to save strangers. The man who had faced her down, yes, but who had also pulled her from the path of an avalanche. No, she whispered, surprising herself. He is not unfit. He is a brave man. He is just wrong. Then my hands are tied. The judge sighed. It was the sound of defeat. He picked up his gavel. This court has no choice, based on the evidence. No. The voice was tiny. It was high, but it cut through the room like a shard of glass. Everyone froze. Thomas, who had been standing silent, his face pale, let go of Sarah's skirt. He stepped forward. He walked into the small space between his mother and his father. He was not crying. His face was a mask of small, grave seriousness. His fists were clenched at his sides. Judge Harlan lowered his gavel, staring. Thomas. Thomas looked up at the judge. You cannot. The entire room held its breath. Thomas turned. He looked at Ezra Morgan. He looked at the tall, rich, powerful man who claimed him. You are my father, he said. He said the word as if tasting it. I think I remember the picture. I remember her, my first mama. Ezra's hard face completely fractured. A single, ragged breath escaped him. Amelia, he whispered. But, Thomas said, his voice rising. He turned back, ran the single step to Sarah, and grabbed her rough hand. He held it up for the whole room to see. This is my mama. She found me. She is my now mama. He would not let go. He looked back and forth, between the two adults. His blue eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a simple, profound, and unanswerable logic. I was lost. She found me. He pointed to Sarah. Now you found me. He pointed to Ezra. He looked at the judge. Why does one have to go away? Why does everyone want me to be lost again? Why can't I have two? He looked at Ezra, his small face desperate. Why can't I have a mama and a father? The question hung in the air. It was an arrow. It pierced the law, the money, the grief, the anger. It went straight into the heart of the matter. Sarah was sobbing openly, her hand over her mouth. Ezra Morgan looked at the boy. He looked at this child who was his, who had his wife's eyes, but who was a stranger who had just, in one simple question, dismantled his entire world. He had come to reclaim his past, to possess the one thing that was his. He had come to win. He saw his lawyer, ready to object. He saw the judge, bound by the law. He saw Sarah, broken, and he saw his son, standing between them, trying to build a bridge. He remembered the blizzard, her defiance. You are not God. Ezra Morgan, you do not get to decide. He remembered the snowslide, the feel of her in his arms, the sheer, vital terror of almost losing her. He was the one doing the taking. He was the one creating the loss. He was becoming the same blind, cruel force that had stolen his family in the first place. His son's question echoed, "Why can't I have two?" He looked at his lawyer. The man was shuffling papers, confused. Ezra raised one, steady hand. "Wait," he said. His voice was hoarse. He moved. He walked past his lawyer. He did not stop until he was standing in front of Thomas. Then, the millionaire, the man who commanded empires, knelt in the dusty office. He was eye level with his son. He was at Sarah's feet. "Thomas," he said, his voice thick with an emotion no one in the room had ever heard from him. You are right. You are a very wise and a very brave young man." He looked up. His gaze met Sarah's. The armor was gone. The suit, the money, the power, it had all burned away. She was looking at the man from the snowdrift, raw, grieving, and lost. "He is right, Sarah." Ezra stood. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I wish to retract my petition." The room exploded. A dozen voices spoke at once. Mr. Davies, his lawyer, shot to his feet. "Mr. Morgan, what are you doing? This is—" Ezra silenced him with a look. Judge Harlan banged his gavel. "Order, order." He stared at Ezra. "Retract, Mr. Morgan. I do not understand." "I am not abandoning my claim," Ezra said, his voice firming, finding a new, different kind of strength. "I am amending it. I came here to find my son. I see now that he was never lost. He was found." He looked at Sarah, and his voice softened. "He is hers. As much as he is mine. I will not be the man who takes a child from his mother." He looked back at the judge. "The law gives me a right, but my son has given me a solution. The petition is withdrawn." Judge Harlan stared, his mouth open. For a full 10 seconds, he said nothing. He looked at Sarah's tear-stained face. He looked at Ezra's rigid, proud posture. He looked at the small boy between them. "This is highly irregular," the judge finally stammered. "But it is welcome." He fumbled for his gavel. Case dismissed. The room erupted in noise. People were cheering. Martha Gable was crying. In the center of it all, Ezra Morgan stood still, a man who had just set his entire life's purpose on fire. He had won and lost, and he did not know what came next. Thomas knew. The boy, seeing the tension break, seeing his mother's tears, seeing his father's surrender, did the one thing no one could have predicted. He let go of Sarah's hand. He ran the 2 steps across the small space, and he threw his arms around Ezra Morgan's waist, burying his face in the expensive wool of his suit. Ezra froze. His body went rigid. His hands, which had built fortunes, hovered in the air, trembling, useless. It had been 3 years. Then, slowly, as if lifting a great weight. His hands came down. They settled on his son's small, shaking back. He held him. He closed his eyes. He held his son. He looked over the boy's head. His gaze found Sarah's. She was watching them, her hand on her heart. Her tears were not of victory. They were of a profound and terrifying and beautiful confusion. The war was over. A new world, one they would have to build together, had just begun. The heavy oaken door of the judge's office swung shut, closing with a quiet click. The sudden silence was louder than all the shouting and murmuring had been. The crowd was gone, pouring back into the street, carrying the news, a buzzing, unbelievable story. Left behind, in the small, hot room, were the three of them, Sarah, Ezra, and Thomas. Thomas, having released his father's waist, now stood in the middle of the room, in the exact spot where he had spoken. He looked from Sarah to Ezra, his small face etched with a sudden, terrible uncertainty, as if he feared his brave words had broken everything. Sarah was the first to move. She knelt, her knees hitting the dusty floor, and held out her arms. "Thomas, come here." He ran to her, burying his face in her neck. She held him, her body shaking with the aftershock of the confrontation. She felt him trembling. Ezra Morgan stood alone, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. He watched them, the mother and child, a perfect, unbreakable circle. He was the intruder. He had withdrawn his petition, but he was still the man on the outside. I did not know what else to do," he said. His voice was not the commanding tone of the boardroom, nor the cold fury of his first arrival. It was the voice of a man at a complete loss. Sarah looked up, her eyes red, her arm holding Thomas tight. She just nodded. She was too exhausted, too relieved, to form words. Ezra looked at his son who was clinging to another. He should not have been forced to do that, a child, in a courtroom. He was not forced, Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. He did what neither of us could. He spoke the truth. He wants us both. The words hung in the silence. Both, a concept the law had no room for. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "What do we do now, Mr. Morgan?" He winced at the name. "Ezra, please!" He ran a hand over his face. He looked around the judge's poor office. Then his mind went to her cabin, to the isolation, to the poverty. He remembered the feel of the wind. "It means I have been a fool," he said, his voice raw. "I came here with a lawyer, with money, with rights. I was trying to win him, as if he were a prize, a property." He looked at Sarah, his gaze unflinching, finally clear of anger. "You said you were his now mama. You are. I cannot take him from his home." Sarah's breath caught. It was over. The relief was so sudden, so total, it was almost painful. "But," Ezra continued, and her heart seized again. His voice was not threatening. It was filled with a new, hard resolve. "I will not let him live in that cabin. Not as it is. I am his father, and I will not see him." "It is all we have," she flared, the old defensiveness rising. "I know," Ezra said, holding up one hand, silencing her. "I am not insulting you. I am stating a fact. We were in that storm. You and I. We know what that wilderness is. That cabin is not safe. It is not warm enough. It is not secure. I cannot, in good conscience, leave him there." "So you are taking him?" "No," Ezra said. He stepped closer. "I am staying. I am sending my lawyer back to San Francisco. That part of my life is done. For now, I am here to be a father." "How?" she whispered, her fear and suspicion warring with a tiny, fragile spark of hope. "Let me help," he said. "Let me make the cabin safe. Let me use what I have to fix it. A new roof, proper glass for the window. Let me add a room, for him, a real room." He saw the refusal forming on her face. the proud, angry rejection of his money. "Not as payment," he said quickly, his voice urgent. "Not as compensation. I will never use that word again, as a father's duty, as my contribution. He is my son. He deserves to be safe." Sarah was torn. She hated his money. It was the weapon he had used to try and destroy her, but a new roof, glass, a room for Thomas. These were not luxuries. They were survival. She looked at her son, who was now peeking out from her shoulder, watching Ezra with a dawning, incredible wonder. He had a father who built things. And then what?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You build a room, and you leave." "No," Ezra said. I do not know. I want to see him. I want to know him. And I want him to know me. Maybe he can have his room at the cabin. With you. And he can visit me. At the hotel. We can share him." Thomas, sensing the new accord, finally spoke. "Two homes?" he asked, his voice small. Ezra looked at the boy, and a smile, the first genuine smile Sarah had ever witnessed, transformed his face. It erased the hard lines, the grief. "Yes, Thomas, 2 homes." Sarah looked at her son. She looked at this strange, powerful, broken man. She was terrified of this new, unknown path, but it was the only one that did not end in a cliff. She took a deep breath. She stood. We will try. We will try." The next morning, Ezra Morgan did not arrive at her ridge alone. He came with 2 large wagons, not filled with lawyers, but with lumber, with bundles of fresh shingles, with panes of glass wrapped in straw, and with tools. The wagons were also loaded with food, not just sacks of staples, but crates of apples, canned peaches, smoked hams, and a side of beef. He also brought his 3 ranch hands, the same men who had ridden with him into the blizzard. They looked equally out of place, but they were here to work. Sarah met them at the door, her rifle in her hands. Though it was pointed at the ground, she was wearing her work clothes. Her sleeves rolled. She felt like a woman bracing for an invasion. "Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice stiff. "Ezra," he corrected, swinging down from the wagon seat. He, too, was changed. The dark suit was gone, replaced by simple, sturdy trousers and a flannel shirt. He looked like a rancher. "I told you, my name is Ezra." "Ezra," she said, testing the name. This is too much." "It is not enough," he replied, his gaze sweeping her cabin, but this time, not with the cold judgment of his first visit. He was assessing it as a builder. "That roof will not survive another winter. The chinking is failing, and that window is parchment. He needs light, and he needs his own room." He was not asking for permission. He was stating a plan. His men, understanding the strange, delicate truce, tipped their hats to Sarah. "Ma'am." They immediately set to work. Sarah was overwhelmed. This was her space, her sanctuary, and it was now filled with strange men. With the sound of hammers and saws, she retreated inside, her hands balling into fists. She did not know what to do. So she did the only thing she could. She put a pot of coffee on the fire and began to make stew. Thomas, however, was ecstatic. His fear of this tall stranger was gone, replaced by a 6-year-old's boundless curiosity. He followed Ezra everywhere. "Are you building my room right here? Will it have a glass window? A real one?" Ezra, the man who moved markets with a telegram, found himself kneeling in the dirt, drawing lines with a stick. "Yes, right here. The foundation will be stone, and the window will face the south, for the sun." He was awkward. His movements were stiff, but he was patient. He was trying. While inspecting the wall for the new addition, Ezra's hand brushed against the mantel. He saw the small, clumsily carved horse. He picked it up, his large, calloused fingers tracing the rough cuts. "You made this?" he asked, looking at Thomas. Thomas beamed. "Yes, it is for Mama." "It is a fine horse," Ezra said, his voice suddenly thick. He remembered the perfect, painted rocking horse he had bought for Thomas in St. Louis. A horse that had turned to ash. This crude piece of wood, carved by his son's own hand, felt more real, more valuable than anything he owned. Sarah watched them from the cabin door, her hands white on a dish rag. She saw the tenderness in Ezra's awkward posture. She saw the way he listened to Thomas, her heart, so long barred and bolted against this man, ached with a deep and terrifying confusion. The news of the great cabin build spread through Redemption faster than gossip of a gunfight. The town was astounded. The millionaire had not left with the boy. He had taken off his suit, picked up a hammer, and was working as a common carpenter on the widow's land. The community, which had been so sharply divided, did not know what to make of it. At the general store, the atmosphere had transformed. Mr. Henderson, the banker who had been so cold, approached Sarah when she came for supplies. He cleared his throat, his face pink with embarrassment. "Mrs. Blackwood Sarah, I must confess, I am astonished. Mr. Morgan, he is a man of remarkable character, a good man, a true father." Martha Gable, who had been on Sarah's side from the start, was beaming. "It is just what the boy needed, dear. A mother's love, and now a father's protection. It is a true blessing, is what it is." Even the threat of the Stone brothers vanished. They were seen once, watching the construction from a distant ridge, but they did not come close. The cabin was no longer the isolated home of a poor widow. It was, quite visibly, under the protection of Ezra Morgan. His mere presence, the sound of his hammers, was a shield more powerful than any rifle. The town, which had braced for a tragedy, was now witnessing an act of construction. It was not just a room being added to a cabin. It was a family being built, in the most unusual, public, and decent way possible. On the third day, a wagon came up the ridge. It was not Ezra's. It was the blacksmith, Mr. Hardy, and his wife. He brought a set of new, heavy iron hinges for the door. She brought a freshly baked apple pie. "Figured you could use these, ma'am," the blacksmith said, avoiding Sarah's eyes, embarrassed by the charity. The old ones were lacking. "And the men need a hot meal," his wife added. They were not the last. The community, which had been split, now rallied. They were not supporting Sarah or Ezra. They were supporting this strange, fragile, new thing they were all building together. They were supporting Thomas. Sarah stood on her porch, which was now mended and level. She watched as women from the town, women who had whispered about her, served coffee to the men. Her small, lonely world had been breached. But it was not an invasion of hostility. It was an invasion of kindness. Ezra stood beside her, a hammer dangling from his hand. His fine city shirt was stained with sweat. His hands were blistered. "It is a good cabin," he said, looking at the original log walls she had chinked herself. "You built it well. Strong." "It was all I could do," she said quietly, overwhelmed. "You did what I could not," he replied, his voice low. "You were here. You saved him. I only know how to write checks. This," he gestured with the hammer, "this is new." She looked at him. The man from the snowdrift. The man from the courtroom. He was covered in sawdust. "It looks good on you, Ezra." He met her gaze, and for a long moment, it was not about Thomas. It was about the two of them, two survivors, standing on a porch, watching their world being rebuilt. It was terrifying, and it felt impossibly right. The cabin was transformed. The roof was new, its shingles tight and even. The wind no longer whistled through the log walls, which were freshly chinked and sealed. A new room, Thomas's room, extended from the south side, and its centerpiece was a real glass window, a rectangle of clear light that caught the morning sun. The old parchment window was gone, replaced by glass as well. The cabin was no longer a small, dark fist raised against the wilderness. It was a home. Ezra Morgan had not returned to San Francisco. His private rail car sat on the siding in Redemption, a silent, empty symbol of a life he was no longer living. He had, instead, purchased the town's small, failing bank from Mr. Henderson, an act that had stabilized the entire community. He took rooms at the hotel, but he was rarely in them. Every morning, he rode his black stallion up the ridge to the cabin. Their new life was a strange, unwritten map they navigated one awkward day at a time. The first week after the construction, he had arrived with a pony in tow, a beautiful, gentle pinto. Thomas was beside himself with joy, but Sarah was terrified. "He is too small. Ezra, he will fall." "He is a boy. Sarah, boys fall," Ezra had replied, his voice firm but not unkind. "He needs to learn to ride properly. I will not have him breaking his neck on one of your farm mules." "I do not have a mule." "You know what I mean." He had lifted Thomas into the small saddle, his large, sure hands adjusting the boy's legs. He held the lead rope. "I will not let him be hurt." Sarah watched from the porch, her hands knotted in her apron, her heart in her throat. She watched Ezra lead the pony, his voice a low, patient rumble, teaching their son. He was a natural father. The sight caused a pain in her chest so complex it had no name. It was a mixture of gratitude, resentment, and a profound, aching jealousy. This was a right she had never had to share. But as the days turned into weeks, the rhythm found them. He was not just a visitor. He was a partner. He mended the fences that the Stone brothers had long since neglected. He dug a new, deeper well, so she would not have to haul water from the creek in winter. He taught Thomas how to handle the pony, and he also sat with him by the fire, reading from books he had ordered from the East. Not just the Bible, but books about adventure, about geography, about history. Sarah, in turn, found herself teaching Ezra. She taught him the land, not the land as something to be owned or measured, but as a living thing. She showed him which herbs to gather for a fever, how to read the clouds, how to find the quiet place where the deer came to drink. He was a man who had only ever known how to command. Now, he was learning to listen. One evening, after a long day spent reinforcing the sheep pen, he did not leave at sunset. He sat at her table. It was the first time. The stew was the same simple food she had always made, but the table was new. Sturdy oak, built by his men. Thomas, exhausted, had fallen asleep over his book. Ezra carried him to his new room, to his new bed. Sarah watched the tall, powerful man tuck their son in with a gentleness that seemed almost impossible. When he returned, she was on the new porch, watching the stars. The air was cool and clean. He sat, not in her late husband's chair, but in a new one he had brought. They sat in silence for a long time. He told me about Mary," Ezra said quietly, his voice breaking the stillness. Sarah froze. "You're your wife, Amelia." "No," Ezra said. He turned to look at her. His face was in shadow, but she could feel the weight of his gaze. "Your daughter, Mary." He asked if his first mama, Amelia, was with her, in heaven. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. A small, dry sob escaped her. She had not spoken that name aloud in 2 years. He is an extraordinary child," Ezra said, his voice thick. "He holds so much. He holds all of us. Sarah." "I know," she whispered, tears running freely down her cheeks. Ezra leaned forward. He did not touch her, but his presence was a warmth. "I never spoke of Amelia. Not after. I could not. I just built things. I bought things. I thought if I moved fast enough, it would not catch me." He looked out at the dark hills. "It caught me. It lives right here." He touched his chest. I think you are the only other person on earth who knows what that feels like." She looked at him, at this man she had hated, had feared, had fought, this man who had saved her, and whom she had saved. He was not a millionaire. He was a fellow survivor. Yes, she said, I know. That night, the wall between them, the last one, crumbled. They did not become lovers. They became something rarer. They became partners. They talked for hours. About Elias, about Amelia, about the children they had lost, and the one they now shared. They built a bridge of shared grief, and it was strong enough to hold them both. The town of redemption, which had lived for the drama, now settled into a quiet, resigned acceptance. When Sarah, Ezra, and Thomas rode into town together on their wagon for supplies, the community no longer saw a scandal. They saw a family. It was an unconventional family, to be sure. He, with his bank and his fine black horse, she, with her ridge cabin and her small flock of sheep, and the boy, who lived in both worlds. He would spend 2 nights a week at the hotel with his father, where he would learn numbers and read about San Francisco. The rest of the time, he was at the cabin, his home, with his mother, where he would learn to split wood and gather eggs. The community saw that the boy was not just safe. He was not just rich. He was happy. He was thriving. He had the fierce, compassionate heart of his mother, and he was gaining the steady, confident mind of his father. Mr. Henderson, the banker, would now rush to greet Ezra and Sarah, not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a genuine friend. Martha Gable pressed cookies into Thomas's hands and would share recipes with Sarah, the two of them laughing like old friends, the Stone brothers, having found their land useless and their reputation in tatters, had sold their holdings to Ezra. He had, in turn, signed the deed, not to himself, but to Sarah Blackwood. She was no longer a tenant on his protected land. She was a landowner, secure and independent. Life went on. The seasons turned. The brutal white of winter gave way to the green, vibrant life of a Wyoming summer. Thomas grew. He was 7. Then he was 8. His legs grew longer. His face lost its baby roundness. He could ride the Pinto at a full gallop. His laughter carried on the wind. One warm afternoon, Sarah was in her garden, a garden that was now twice as large, its bounty filling their cellar. She was weeding, her hands in the rich, dark earth. Ezra was nearby, mending a section of fence. He did not need to. His men could have done it. But he, like her, found a peace in the simple, physical work. He wore his flannel shirt, the sleeves rolled, his forearms dark and strong. He was no longer a man of the city. He was a man of the West. Thomas was running between them. He was helping neither. He was on a mission of his own, carrying a bucket, his face streaked with dirt, intent on building some grand fort by the creek. He ran to Sarah, showed her a smooth, white rock he had found, then ran back toward Ezra, shouting something about needing wood. He was the center of their world, a living, breathing, joyful bridge. Sarah stood, wiping her brow with her forearm. She watched her son, her heart so full it felt as if it might burst. Ezra had stopped his work, too. He was leaning against the fence post, his hammer in his hand. He was also watching Thomas. His gaze lifted. It met Sarah's, across the bright, sunlit yard. In his eyes, she saw it all. The storm, the courtroom, the shared grief, the years of patient, quiet work, the respect, the companionship, and something else, a deep, abiding love. It was not the fiery passion of a first romance. It was something stronger, something built, like the cabin, to last. He started walking toward her. He did not stop until he was standing in front of her, at the edge of her garden. "He is a good boy, Sarah," Ezra said, his voice low. "He is our boy," she replied, her voice soft. He reached out. He did not touch her face, or her arm. He took her hand, the same hand she had once held up in the courtroom. His hand, scarred from his own new labor, closed over hers, scarred from her long survival. It was a perfect fit. You have made my life whole again," he said, his voice thick. "I came here to take..." And you gave me everything." She smiled, her eyes shining. "We gave each other everything, Ezra." He raised her hand, his gaze never leaving hers, and pressed his lips to her rough knuckles, a gesture of such profound respect, such deep love, that it sealed their world. They were not two, and they were not three. They were one. A family, forged in the wild, built on loss, and finished with a love stronger than any blood, any law, or any winter storm. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment with where you are listening from so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And remember to subscribe to Wild West Night.